Hello, Year 6, Miss Owen here for your third topic session of the unit World War II. So today we're going to be looking at the Blitz. Now, lots of you might already know lots of information about the Blitz. Some of you might have even had family members involved in evacuation and involved in what happened during the Blitz. So it'd be interesting to see what information you can tell me. So do you want to go ahead and pause the video, write today's date and the title. Okay, so our learning powers for today are absorption. We're going to be taking on a bit of information about the Blitz, about why Hitler changed his tactics at that point in the war and what the Blitz meant for Germany, but also for Britain. Hopefully be able to understand the events, but also really thinking about the impact on the British public. And that links into our imagining, because you've almost got to put yourself in the shoes of a child who is experiencing the Blitz, or even an adult who's experiencing the Blitz. It might be an opportunity for you to get in contact with family members that you know might have been involved in those sort of situations. Ask them what it was like, obviously being very sensitive towards their experiences. Okay, a bit of total recall. So we've got a little mixture of geography and history here. So who was the Prime Minister of Great Britain at the beginning of World War II? He was not the Prime Minister for the remainder of World War II. What is the name of the valley where the ancient Egyptians buried their pharaohs? And who wrote a book entitled On the Origin of Species, about his theory of evolution? Do you want to go ahead and pause the video now and have a go at those questions? Okay, so the Prime Minister of Great Britain at the time, at the beginning of World War II, was Neville Chamberlain. He actually resigned as Prime Minister, and a man called Winston Churchill took over. The Valley of the Kings is where they buried their pharaohs, the Egyptians, during the New Kingdom. Before that, they've been buried in the pyramids. And the man who wrote The Origin of Species is Charles Darwin. Okay, so first of all, the Blitz, as you know, was a huge bombing raid started by the Germans to put Britain in a state of weakness, so that they couldn't go to war, essentially. But we need to understand why. Why the Blitz? Why did Hitler decide to start bombing certain areas of Britain? So in the summer of 1940, Hitler decided to invade Britain as part of his plan. His plan was to take control of the English Channel by destroying the Royal Air Force, and then to send German troops in to Britain to take control. That was his plan. In July 1940, Hitler put his plan into operation. The German Air Force, which is known as the Luftwaffe, began making daily bombing raids on British ships, ports, radar stations, airfields, and aircraft factories. They were really targeting certain areas that would make it very difficult for the British armed forces to fight back. It became known as the Battle of Britain, which we will cover a little bit later in this topic. So if you know anything about the Battle of Britain, keep hold of it, because you'll need it later in the topic. The Royal Air Force took to the skies, and there were many battles between British and German planes over the Channel and South Coast. So it was quite a battle of the aircrafts. Although British losses were high, German losses were higher, and at the beginning of September, Hitler decided to try a new tactic to conquer Britain. So his initial plan of sending his Luftwaffe, his aircraft, and fighting against the British wasn't working. So he thought, you know what, I need to come up with a new plan, and that's what he did. So Blitz is a shortened form of the German word Blitzkrieg. I think I'm saying that right, which is known as the Lightning War. Due to his lack of success in the skies, Hitler believed that by targeting civilians, he could force the British to surrender, and on the 7th of September 1940 began his daily bombing campaign known as the Blitz. So initially, these bombing raids were targeting specific places, such as radar stations, aircraft carriers, all that kind of thing, to impact the armed forces. Now he's trying targeting civilians to sort of force the British into surrender to save as many people as they could. London was the main target, but other major cities were also bombed. He bombed London for 11 consecutive weeks, bar one night. So for 11 weeks, week after week, for 11, he bombed London. Casualties were high. On the first night of bombing, nearly 2,000 people were killed and 1,600 badly injured. Families were buried in the rubble of their homes. It was quite a sight. Within a few weeks, the daily bombing raids had become nightly raids. So he switched his tactic to nighttime raids. Hitler decided to make the bombing raids at night to increase the fear factor and also to make people weaker by not allowing them to sleep properly. So it was almost like a sleep deprivation thing as well, that people knew that a bombing raid would happen and they weren't going to sleep properly. People in London slept in underground stations for protection. So those public shelters became really busy during this time because they were deeper underground and they thought they would protect them more than their Anderson shelters or Morris shelters. Those are the ones we looked at last week. So he was quite, he had to think about this, and he really put a system into place that he thought would raise the bar in terms of fear and really make people wish the war was over a lot quicker. So there are public shelters in most towns. We looked at that last week. But many people also built those Anderson shelters in their gardens. The government tried to confuse the German bombers by enforcing a blackout. So that's when the blackout was really full in effect. Light did not escape houses. They tried to really confuse those raiders into thinking that they weren't actually over certain areas. So things like street lamps were switched off, car headlights had to be covered, and people had to hang black material in their windows or cardboard, anything to decrease the amount of light that was escaping from houses. And after May 1941, the bombing raids became less frequent as Hitler turned his attention to Russia. Nevertheless, the effects of the Blitz were devastating. 60,000 people lost their lives, 87,000 people were seriously injured, and 2 million homes were destroyed during this time. So it had a massive impact on the British public, had a massive impact on the British Armed Forces because of the strength of the Luftwaffe and their bombing raids, but we carried on. So the cities that were heavily bombed were places like Swansea, Cardiff, Bristol, Southampton, Birmingham. Plymouth was on the list, Liverpool and Coventry. Now Plymouth essentially is on the list because of the dockyard and because of the naval presence and the fact that it's close to, it has access to the channel for our ships and things. We talked about barrage balloons last topic session, but they were put up to force the German planes to fly higher, so their bombing would be less accurate because they're having to let their bombs loose from such a high height. But there was also something called the Red Sands Fort, and it was to stop enemy bombers finding their way up the Thames estuary. In 1943, the army built the Red Sands Fort, a group of anti-aircraft platforms off the Kent coast. So they did everything they possibly could to try and protect as many people as they could. So Plymouth and the Blitz. You might already know quite a bit about this from your families. Who knows? So the first raid was on Saturday the 6th of April 1940, when one bomber dropped the first bomb. Between July 1940 and April 1944, Plymouth had 602 alerts and 59 bombing raids. Now you might not think that's a lot, but for during that time, that was quite an extensive amount of bombing. The number of casualties in the raids were 1,172 killed, 1,092 seriously wounded, 2,177 slightly wounded, 7 missing, believed killed, a total of 4,448 casualties. These were civilians. The numbers of servicemen killed or injured was never published, so these were just the civilians. The main time for what we called the Plymouth Blitz was the period of March to May 1941, with 6 large 100-plus bombing raids, as well as the smaller ones. So they would have small raids that didn't last very long, and then they would have very big raids that could possibly last most of the night. The heat from the fires caused the tar on the roads to melt, and you always often think about the Blitz having an effect on buildings and buildings falling down. Well, actually it has more of an effect as well on road structure and all that kind of stuff. Plymouth suffered more bombing than Coventry and Southampton, and greater damage and casualties, things like that. But you can read this information rather than me telling it to you. Like I said, you probably know more about this from your families anyway. Okay, so this is the Plymouth Dockyard during the raids, during the bombing raids. This, I believe, is Drake Circus, so Royal Parade, that area during the bombing raids. Huge damage being done there. Okay, so I want to show you this before I go on to the activity. So this is the Blitz, London's longest night.
This is the story of one night in the Second World War, December the 29th, 1940. It was the night Hitler intended, with a single Luftwaffe raid, to bring the people of London to surrender and raze the landmarks of the city to the ground.
They thought they could actually bomb us into submission to tell us this is what we can do.
It wasn't one airplane, there were dozens of them, bombing everywhere. And it was frightening to see them coming down, because you knew that the city all around us was all on fire.
It was an air attack so ferocious, it started an inferno that threatened to destroy the city and all it stood for in a single night.
It was just so devastating. You realize that this is an unbelievable moment in history.
Right, so I'm not going to show you all because it is 44 minutes long. If we were in school, we possibly could have been watching it. But your activity today is sort of like that, linking into that imagining learning power, is to create a diary entry from the perspective of a child or an adult, completely up to you, going through a night during the Blitz. Okay, and I'm going to show you a little clip from a film, one of my favourites, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, which follows the story of 4 siblings, Peter, Susan, Edmund and Lucy. And they are children that are evacuated to this lovely country estate during World War II. But there's a scene right at the beginning of the film where they are still in London, still in their family home, and there's a bombing raid going on. So I want to show you this because it will help you get into the mindset of these children, help you to write your diary entry. Some of you probably have seen this film. there you go. That gives you a bit of insight into what it might possibly have been like trying to get to those shelters when you heard those sirens going off. And you're right, the idea is that you're going to create a diary entry that really tries to paint that picture in your mind, and get into the mindset of that child and how scary that might have been, would have been, hearing those sirens go off, feeling the ground shake beneath your feet when the bombs hit the ground, all that kind of stuff. Okay, now the words are still important because you might want to build into your diary entry why Hitler's now decided to start bombing civilian areas, why he even decided to use bombing raids as a tactic, but then what's really important is to describe the impact. So you could even build in some of that factual knowledge about the amount of people that unfortunately lost their lives, or the homes that were destroyed, all that kind of stuff. Now I have done a bit of a waggle on the next slide. Now this is just the start of a diary entry. It is not a complete diary entry, and it's not something to be copied. It's something to use as you can magpie from to get you started, but it's not an entire diary entry. And I really want you to be as imaginative as you possibly can. Use those writing features that we've talked about before. Use metaphors, personification. Onomatopoeias are a great thing to use during this element because you're talking, you could be using your senses to describe the sounds and the feeling of that time. So use similes if you can. Build those things in. Challenge yourself. Okay, so here's your waggle. 14th of November 1940. Dear Diary, tonight has been the most terrifying of all the raids so far. I woke to the sounds of the sirens screaming at us, alerting us to do another attack to move to the shelters. The ground shook as the enemy bombs tore out the ground, destroying everything they touched. Susan, my older sister, clasped my hand so tightly as we sprinted down the stairs and out to the Anderson shelter at the bottom of the garden, our safe haven amongst the barren wasteland that London was becoming. So, like I said, this is just the start. You could really go into so much detail about the entire night. You could start it from when they've had dinner to when they go to bed, and then all of a sudden they're woken up by this horrifying noise of the siren. Or it could be that a bomb goes off and that's what wakes you up. Or you're already awake because you know that the night is going to bring bombs with it. So go into as much detail as you possibly can and use the factual information that I've already talked to you about concerning the Blitz. Go back through the video if you need to. Maybe talk to family members about their experiences if you're able to. Okay. Don't forget to send pictures to your teachers. I look forward to reading some of the things that you send through to us, and I'll see you again for another topic session soon. Okay, bye.